Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the work of Mr. Rudolf Steiner. This is Christianity as a Mystical Fact, and we are reading along and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of me and why I say the things that I do. A particular note, again today, is almost certainly going to be the unconventional Bible study, and that will explain a lot of things to you. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Christianity as a Mystical Fact with Chapter 5, The Wisdom of the Mysteries and the Myth. The mystic sought forces and beings within himself which are unknown to man as long as he remains in the ordinary attitude towards life. The mystic puts the great question about his own spiritual forces and the laws which transcend the lower nature. A man of ordinary views of life, bounded by the senses and logic, creates gods for himself, or, when he gets to the point of seeing that he has made them, he disclaims them. The mystic knows that he creates gods. He knows why he creates them. He sees, so to say, behind the natural law which makes man create them. It is as though a plant suddenly became conscious and learned the laws of its growth and development. As it is, it develops in lovely unconsciousness. If we knew about the laws of its own being, its relationship to itself would be completely changed. What the lyric poet feels when he sings about a plant, what a botanist thinks when he investigates its laws, this would hover before a conscious plant as an ideal of itself. It is thus with the mystic, with regards to the laws, the forces working within him. As one who knew, he was forced to create something divine beyond himself, and the initiates took up the same attitude to that which the people had created beyond nature. That is, to the world of popular gods and myths. They wanted to penetrate the laws of this world of gods and myths. Where the people saw the form of a god or a myth, they looked for a higher truth. Let us take an example. The Athenians had been forced by the Cretan king Minos to deliver up to him every 8 years 7 boys and 7 girls. These were thrown as food to a terrible monster, the Minotaur. When the mournful tribute was to be paid for the 3rd time, the king's son Theseus accompanied it to Crete. On his arrival there, Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, interested herself in him. The Minotaur dwelt in the labyrinth, a maze from which no one could extricate himself who had once got in. Theseus desired to deliver his native city from the shameful tribute. For this purpose he had to enter the labyrinth into which the monstrous booty was usually thrown, and to kill the Minotaur. He undertook the task, overcame the formidable foe, and succeeded in regaining the open air with the aid of a ball of thread which Ariadne had given him. The mystic had to discover how the creative human mind comes to weave such a story as the botanist watches the growth of plants in order to discover its laws. So did the mystic watch the creative spirit. He sought for a truth, a nucleus of wisdom where the people had invented a myth. Sallust discloses to us the attitude of a mystical sage towards a myth of this kind. We might call the whole world a myth, says he, which contains bodies and things visibly, and souls and spirits in a hidden manner. If the truth about the gods were taught at all, the unintelligent would disdain it from not understanding it, and the more capable would make light of it. But if the truth is given in a mystical veil, it is assured against contempt and serves as a stimulus to philosophic thinking. When the truth contained in a myth was sought by an initiate, he was conscious of adding something which did not exist in the consciousness of the people. He was aware of being above that consciousness, as a botanist is above a growing plant. Something was expressed which was different from what was present in the mythical consciousness, but it was looked upon as a deeper truth, symbolically expressed in the myth. Man is confronted with his own sense nature in the form of a hostile monster. He sacrifices to it the fruits of his personality, and the monster devours them and continues to do so till the conqueror, Theseus, awakens in man. His intuition spreads the thread by means of which he finds his way again when he repairs to the maze of the senses in order to slay his enemy. The mystery of human knowledge itself is expressed in this conquering of the senses. The initiate knows that mystery. It points to a force in human personality unknown to ordinary consciousness, but nevertheless active within it. It is the force which creates the myth, which has the same structure as mystical truth. This truth finds its symbol in the myth. All right, so there are several problems here, right? First off, you were assuming, not entirely groundlessly, that the story of the Minotaur is not a truth. But it might be. There may have been a beast contained within a labyrinth, and that there might have been actual tribute that was needed to be given. This does not necessarily implicate that this was some greater spiritual understanding. As a matter of fact, it is almost certain that it was not a greater spiritual understanding, because even if it was not true, people make shit up. People make shit up all the time. People make up stories all of the time. These days, we monetize the hell out of that. There are all kinds of series that you can watch on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and all of these different streaming sources. There's all kinds of things that you can watch that have absolutely no bearing in truth whatsoever. So it is entirely possible that this was a true story, that there was a creature contained within this labyrinth and that they sacrificed children to it. And it is entirely possible that it was a made-up story that was just to entertain people. Both of those hold equal weight because we don't know. What we do know, however, is that humanity has a tendency to take these stories and then try to retroactively insert themselves into it. We see that in the story of the flood, right? Many people don't understand the flood story is not exclusive to the Bible. Well, we'll put it that way. As a matter of fact, it appears that the Bible took from source material and assimilated it and retroactively inserted themselves into the story of the flood. Does that mean that there was never a man named Noah? Not necessarily, but it is highly suspect that all three of his sons were listed somewhere else as someone else's child or children. That this story was told not just in part but mostly by someone else several thousand years before it was recorded for the Jews. That's a problem, right? That is a self-insertion. That's one of the problems that we had as we went through the Bible study. This is the same thing here, right? This is assuming that way back in the day, this was not just entertainment, and it most likely, that's the most likely out of all of the scenarios. It is entirely possible that there was a monster to devour them. Did that mean that it was some minotaur that was half bull and half human? No. It could be a lion, and they never saw one. It could be some other type of carnivorous creature. It could be a dinosaur, right? I know dinosaurs and humans didn't walk together, but there's plenty of cave paintings of men standing next to dinosaurs, so take from that what you will. It is entirely possible that there were remnants of dinosaurs. It's entirely possible that some reptiles have extremely long lives, and that these reptiles, having extremely long lives, may have survived well past the end of the rest of their people. Our myths of dragons are most likely rooted in dinosaurs. And so it is entirely possible that there was some creature that was representative even of a man with a bull's head. That is entirely possible. Is it likely? Not extremely, but it is possible. It is much more likely that it was a made-up story, that somebody told this to entertain someone. It was told around a campfire, for instance. But to go back and to read into this, your talking points for later is a little bit deceptive, to say the least. We saw in the last one we did yesterday where he intentionally misrepresented Socrates and Plato a couple of different times. That was a self-insertion to a nth degree. This appears to be the same as well. Now, is it possible that this was created as an allegory for a deeper spiritual truth? Yes. Just as much as it is possible that it was a dinosaur in the labyrinth. Or that there was a bull creature that's for some reason this bull eats meat. That's a little bit weird, but hey, whatever. It's a mythological creature. The reading of this deeper enlightenment in this story doesn't really work for me. It is one of the things that I'm just like, yeah, that's a little bit too much of a stretch for me, right? I am much more inclined to believe that it was a dinosaur than I am to believe this, right? The point and force in a human personality unknown to ordinary consciousness, but nevertheless active within it. It is the force which creates the myth, or it's just somebody telling a damn story. Right? That is the most likely scenario, by the way. Like, most likely this was just something that somebody told to scare other people. We do that still today. Humanity has not really changed all that much. We still read back into these stories things that don't really belong there. And so, like, we see that Jordan Peterson, I love Jordan Peterson. He has started me on this journey to change myself. But some of the things he says about Genesis and Exodus is fucking wild. And so, I just want to point out that this almost certainly is a self-insertion. You can look back on any story throughout all of history, and most of them contain a moral, right? Most of them skirt around the edges of a truth. That's probably what happened here with Crete and Minos, right? That is the most likely thing. It was a completely made-up story, and it had no spiritual significance at all. Having gone through a spiritual experience, I do not find a whole lot of simile between the Minotaur of Minos and what I experienced. That doesn't mean someone else couldn't have experienced something different. Doesn't mean that my way is the only way. Doesn't mean that I'm the smartest person on the planet. Doesn't mean anything like that. It just reads a little bit like a self-insertion to me, and we have evidence of Mr. Steiner doing that several times in a couple of different studies now. And so, like, he doesn't even believe in magic. But, man, what then is to be found in the myths? In them is a creation of the spirit, of the unconsciously creative soul. The soul has well-defined laws. In order to create beyond itself, it must work in a certain direction. As the mythological stage, it does this in images, but these are built up according to the laws of the soul. We might also say that when the soul advances beyond the stage of mythological consciousness to deeper truth, these bear the same stamp as did the myths. For one and the same force was at work in their formation. Plotinus, the philosopher of the Neoplatonic school, AD 204 to 269, speaks of this relation of mythological representation to higher knowledge in reference to the presages of Egypt. Whether as a result of rigorous investigations or whether instinctively when imparting their wisdom, the Egyptian sages do not use, for expressing their teaching and precepts, written signs, which are imitations of voice and speech. But they draw pictures, and in the outlines of these they record in their temples the thought contained in each thing, so that every picture contains knowledge and wisdom, and is a definite truth and a complete whole, although there is no explanation nor discussion. Afterwards, the contents of the picture are drawn out of it and expressed in words, and the cause is found why it is as it is and not otherwise. And again, that is you assuming, like, their language was pictures. So they told in pictures. Them pictures could very well represent the words, and do, right? If we wish to find out the connection of mysticism with mythical narratives, we must see what relationship to them there is in the views of the great thinkers, those who knew their wisdom to be in harmony with the methods of the mysteries. We find such harmony in Plato in the fullest degree. His explanations of myths and his application of them in teaching may be taken as a model. And once again, I will point you back to yesterday's video where we showed that he does not interpret Plato in the correct manner. And that is my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but it is definitely my opinion that he misrepresents Plato. In the Phaedrus, a dialogue on the soul, now I haven't done that one, so I don't know, the myth of Boreas is introduced. This divine being, who was seen in the rushing wind, one day saw the fair Orithyia, daughter of the Attic king Erechtheus, gathering flowers with her companions. Seized with love for her, he carried her off to his grotto. Plato, by the mouth of Socrates, rejects a rationalist interpretation of this myth. According to his explanation, an outward, natural fact is poetically symbolized by the narrative. A hurricane seized the king's daughter and hurled her over the rocks. Interpretations of this sort, says Socrates, are learned sophistries, however popular and unusual they may be. For one who has pulled to pieces one of these mythological forms must, to be consistent, elucidate skeptically and explain naturally all the rest in the same way. But even if such a labor could be accomplished, it would, in any case, be no proof of superior talent in one carrying it out, but only of superficial wit, boorish wisdom, and ridiculous haste. Therefore, I leave on one side all such inquiries, and believe what is generally thought about the myths. I do not examine them, as I have just said, but I examine myself, to see whether I, too, may, perhaps, be a monster, more complicated and, therefore, more disordered than the Chimera, more savage than Typhon, and whether I represent a more docile and simple being, to whom some particle of a virtuous and divine nature has been given. And I'm not familiar with the story, so I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but we have seen already that he misrepresents. So we see from this that Plato does not approve of a rationalistic and merely intellectual interpretation of myths. This attitude must be compared with the way in which he himself uses myths in order to express himself through them. When he speaks of the life of the soul, when he leaves the paths of the transitory and seeks the eternal in the soul, when, therefore, images borrowed from sense perception and reasoning thought can no longer be used, then Plato has recourse to the myth. Phaedrus treats of the eternal in the soul, which is portrayed as a car, drawn by two horses winged all over, and driven by a charioteer. One horse is patient and docile, the other is wild and headstrong. If an obstacle comes in the way of the car, the troublesome horse takes the opportunity of impeding the docile one and defying the driver. When the car arrives where it has to follow the gods up the celestial steep, the intractable horse throws the team into confusion. If it is less strong than the good horse, it is overcome, and the car is able to go on into the supersensible realm. It thus happens that the soul can never ascend without difficulties into the kingdom of the divine. Some souls rise more to the vision of eternity, some less. The soul which has seen the world beyond remains safe until the next journey. One who, on account of the intractable horse, has not seen beyond, must try again on the next journey. These journeys signify the various incarnations of the soul. One journey signifies the life of the soul in one personality. The wild horse represents the lower nature, and the docile one the higher nature. The driver, the soul longing for union with the divine. And again, this is entirely a possible interpretation of it. I'm not familiar. I don't have a traditional classical philosophical upbringing, right? I didn't read through all the myths. I am working on that, but it's not something that I am intimately familiar with. I know some of the names, most of the names and some of the stories, but not all of them, and not to the point where I feel comfortable discoursing it. But this can be an allegory for the soul. It can. There's a man driving two horses, and it has two different ways. But there's other allegories to be taken from it, right? You can't get to your destination if you're not, what would be the word? Strapped together. Like, If you're not bound with someone who is cooperative with you, right? That is, like, you have one that is willing to do what is right, and you have one that is not. Right? They fight each other. That can definitely be the human soul. And some of these mysteries absolutely were created to expound upon human myths, right? Or human actions, to try to correct ways of thinking, much in the way that the entirety of the Old Testament was. It was created in order to help people get better in their journeys. And so some of these myths are absolutely created for that. And then some of them are just simple stories, right? That is, how do you explain that the wind blows stronger sometimes? And so you create this God who is sitting out there and he's punishing people by making this wind blow. And it's not. It's just the way that nature works. So myths always have to be taken with a grain of salt. Always, because once again, we are not there when they are built. We don't know the meaning for them. Some of them can be completely literal. Now, the chariot driving the sun, yeah, we can pretty much say that that one's not, right? But we don't know what it's based off of. We don't know where the foundations lie. It is important to remember that many times it is completely created to help humanity get better. Now, what the source of that is, I don't know. Do we have the correct interpretations of them now? Who knows? Many of them were really, really old, and we do not have the explanations, right, with the Minotaur, right? It is entirely possible that it is talking about the journey of the soul, but why the 7 children, right? Why the boys and the girls? Why? There's a whole lot of whys attached to that particular one. Now this, as it's written, a little bit easier, right? It's easy to know that there's not actually a chariot that carries the sun. It is easy to think about the 2 different natures, the complacent one and the rebellious one. It is easy to think about the human driving those and having to make the decision for those. That is an easy one to extrapolate. Some of them are a little bit harder, right? This doesn't seem to be as much of a self-insertion. This just seems to be a better explanation of the thing. And sometimes that is good. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes it is a self-insertion and it doesn't appear to be. I try to point them out when I see them, or when they even seem to be. And again, I say it is not a 100% settled anything, right? If I am sure about something, it is because I have experienced it. Most of the other stuff is left up for discernment, and discernment can differ between me and you, right? We can have completely different interpretations of things. Like this came off of TikTok, so take it with whatever, but somebody played one of Kim Clement's prophecies. Now, if you're not familiar, Kim Clement had an awful lot of prophecies. He spent an awful lot of time with his little piano and music playing in this state of something, and he would spout things off for hours on end, and people took every single one of them to be a prophecy, and more of them have not been true than have ever been true. But if any one of them even comes close to meaning something according to what you want it to mean, then it's Kim Clement was a prophet, despite the fact that he was wrong many, many more times than he was ever right. The way that you look at things makes a difference. It really does. And so I am just attempting to maintain an objective mind as we read through this stuff. There are some things that I know are simply not true, and there are things that I guess are probably not true, and there are some things that I speculate maybe are true. The things that I stand on are the things that I have experienced or I have experience with, and this is not one of them. I just had a really long spiel to explain that sometimes I don't know either. But the assumption here, the assumption is something. Plato resorts to the myth in order to describe the course of the eternal spirit through its various transformations. In the same way, he has recourse, in other writings, to symbolical narrative in order to portray the inner nature of man, which is not perceptible to the senses. Plato is here in complete harmony with the mythical and allegorical manner of expression used by others. For instance, there is in ancient Hindu literature a parable attributed to Buddha. A man very much attached to life, who seeks sensuous pleasures and will die at no price, is pursued by 4 serpents. He hears a voice commanding him to feed and bathe the serpents from time to time. The man runs away, fearing the serpents. Again, he hears a voice warning him that he is pursued by 5 murderers. Once more he escapes. A voice calls his attention to a 6th murderer, who is about to behead him with a sword. Again he flees. He comes to a deserted village, and there he hears a voice telling him that robbers are shortly going to plunder the village. Having again escaped, he comes to a great flood. He feels unsafe where he is, and out of straw, wood, and leaves, he makes a basket in which he arrives at the other shore. Now he is safe. He is a Brahmin. The meaning of this allegory is that man has to pass through the most various states before attaining to the divine. The 4 serpents represent the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. The 5 murderers are the 5 senses. The deserted village is the soul, which has escaped from sense impressions. But it is not safe if it is alone with itself, for its lower nature lays hold of it. It must perish. Man must construct for himself the boat which is to carry him over the flood of the transitory from the one shore, the sense nature, to the other, the eternal divine world. Okay, so a couple of things here. For one, while I am not an expert on all religions, I am pretty sure that Buddha and Hindu are separate, right? They're not the same. Like, I'm pretty sure that Buddha was doing his own thing with no gods, right? That's my understanding, and I can be wrong. I have not done a deep dive into Buddha. And that Hinduism has several gods: Indira, Shiva. There's several of them. I don't know all of them, but. And again, I'm not well versed in that either. But there are 4 snakes that are pursuing you, right? He is pursued by 4 serpents. Well, the elements don't really pursue you, they merely exist, commanding him to feed and bathe the serpents from time to time. So you have to bathe earth, air, wind, and water. Like, you have to feed it and you have to clothe it. Now, you can say that that's, well, you got to pay attention to it. Okay, yeah, you do. You absolutely do. But that doesn't make sense as a snake, first off the top. It doesn't make sense that you have to support them. They support themselves. They are fundamental facts, right? There is fire. There is air. There is water. There is earth. Now, you can attribute all kinds of things to those 4 elements, but they are basically fundamental facts of nature. 5 murderers. Now, okay, this is the 5 senses. Sure. Why are you listening to this voice if it is telling you this, right? There is a voice that tells you, feed and bathe the serpents. And then there is a voice telling you, hey, you're being pursued by 5 murderers. Did you ever see the murderers? Do you know the murderers? Are they actual murderers? Are they actually pursuing you? This is just something that you assume because you heard a voice in your head. That's a little bit wild, and that's coming from somebody who listens to the voices in his head, right? I don't have the wild voices like most people. I have my own voice telling me, hey, this is the thing to do, and that's the Holy Spirit. It is never telling me, hey, you should run from these 5 people that you've never met. Again, he hears another voice. Oh, wait. Once more he escapes, and the voice calls his attention to a 6th murderer, who is about to behead him with a sword. What does that have to... He comes to a deserted village, and he hears a voice telling him that robbers are going to shortly plunder the village. Now, best case scenario, he has a voice that is helping him to avoid danger. But if this is an allegory, it's not a good one. It's really not. There is no reason why the 4 elements would pursue you. There's some reason to understand that your senses do indeed deceive you, but for the most part, you can trust them. Mostly, like I said before, if you got 10 people and they see a car crash, there will be 10 different stories about what happened in the car crash. Every single one of them is going to have a little bit of something different. And so the fundamental truth of your senses are subject to your understanding of those senses. So yes, be wary of trusting all of your senses. Even what you think you see, sometimes you don't. As a matter of fact, you don't actually see anything. We're not going to do the color example. We do that plenty, but there's no red in this shirt. This village, right? He comes to a deserted village and he hears a voice telling him that the robbers are going to plunder the village. And he escapes and then comes to a great flood. And then he builds out of a straw, wood, and leaves a basket where he arrives on the other shore. This can be an allegory for enlightenment, right? You leave behind the four elements, you leave behind the senses, you leave behind all of everybody because you abandon the village. You don't tell them that there's robbers coming. You just bail out and leave them. And then there's a great flood. None of this is the correct actions. That's the problem. Like, that's the problem that I have with this allegory. The five murderers or the five senses, and like, you are supposed to understand your senses. You're not supposed to be ruled by them, but you are not supposed to flee them in some kind of a terror state. You're supposed to be aware of the four elements, but that doesn't mean that they are supposed to control your life, right? This deserted village, if there is a raid coming on the village, then your job is not to leave the village. Your job is to help defend the village. And there are a lot of things that I have a problem with here, and maybe it's just my interpretation. I am fully aware that that is entirely a possibility, but it appears to be just not right. Like, in order to master the senses, you must know the senses. You must understand that what you hear can be wrong, and what you see can be wrong, and what you feel can be wrong. But most of the time it's not. Most of the time what you see is actually what happened. Now, your memory of what you see can get a little fuzzy if you're not focused in. And adrenaline, that'll play funny tricks with your mind. You see a wreck, there's a lot of adrenaline, even if you're not involved. You might remember things a little bit differently. But for the most part, you can trust your senses. For the most part, fire is going to act like fire, and water is going to act like water, and nothing you do is going to make a difference. Right? For the most part, if there is something coming to attack the village, like, that part doesn't even really make sense, right? All right. The deserted village is the soul, which has escaped from sense impressions, but is not yet safe if it is alone with itself, for its lower nature lays hold of it, and it must perish. What is that in the allegory? Where is its lower nature lays hold of it? What part of the allegory is that? Right? This voice in your head telling you that there's about to be a raid, that's the part that you're like, so you're supposed to trust the voice in your head, but not your five senses? That don't make no fucking sense. Like, that's completely insensate. It does not make any sense. And that's not even talking about the sense, like the senses. That's just talking about cognitive ability. He must construct for himself the boat which will carry him over the flood of the transitory from the one shore, the sense nature, to the other, the eternal divine world. And that is in part true, but you can have access to it even if you are not just running off and leaving everybody behind. You construct the vessel which will carry you over that river by prayer, fasting, and meditation. By spending the time in prayer, fasting, and meditation, understanding the motivations, talking about them, asking for things, that's all prayer. Fasting is preparing yourself to receive the instructions, and the meditative part is the instructions. That is where you come to the knowing of the oneness. That is where the revelations of the more comes from. But it's not about creating some kind of a boat, and it's not about isolating yourself for the most part. There is use and utility in isolation, right? There is absolutely use and utility in silence, and that comes from isolation. But you are not meant to be a solitary creature. That is not a thing. If so, then you would have been created all by yourself. You weren't. You were created as part of a family, the human family. Everybody that is in existence everywhere is related to you. You are not meant to be separate from them, and if there is a danger for them, you are meant to warn them at the very least. And I'm getting a little bit too spun up about this, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on. But the allegory does not work for me. It may for someone else, and that is perfectly fine. We're not on the same path if that allegory works for you. It doesn't make sense. As someone who has reached at least a degree of spiritual enlightenment, it makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't. It has no bearing in reality of what I have done at all. Let us look at the Egyptian mystery of Osiris in this light. Osiris had gradually become one of the most important Egyptian divinities. He supplanted other gods in certain parts of the country, and an important cycle of myths was formed around him and his consort, Isis. Osiris was the son of the sun god. His brother was Typhon, Set, and his sister was Isis. Osiris married his sister, and together they reigned over Egypt. The wicked brother Typhon meditated killing Osiris. He had a chest made which was exactly the length of Osiris's body. At a banquet, this chest was offered to the person whom it fitted exactly. This was Osiris and none other. He entered the chest. Typhon and his confederates rushed upon him, closed the chest, and threw it into the river. When Isis heard the terrible news, she wandered far and wide in despair, seeking her husband's body. When she had found it, Typhon again took possession of it and tore it into 14 pieces, which were dispersed in many different places. Various tombs of Osiris were shown in Egypt. In many places up and down the country, portions of the god were said to be buried. Osiris himself, however, came forth from the netherworld and vanquished Typhon. A beam shone from him upon Isis, who in consequence bore a son, Harpocrates or Horus. And now let us compare this myth with the view which the Greek philosopher Empedocles, BC 490 to 430, takes of the universe. He assumes that the one original primeval being, who was once broken up into the four elements, water, fire, water, earth, and air, or into the multiplicity of being. He represents two opposing forces, which within this world of existence brings about growth and decay, love and strife. Empedocles says of these elements, they remain ever the same, but yet by combining their forces, become transformed into men and the numberless beings besides. These are now joined into one, love binding the many together. Now once again they are scattered, dispersing through hatred and strife. That had nothing to do with Osiris. What then are the things in the world from Empedocles' point of view? They are the elements in different combinations. Yes, that is true. That is true. You are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, magnesium, and all of the various elements in a different arrangement than mine. We use the same elements, but it is in a different arrangement. It is the same for practically everything in existence. They could only come into being because the primeval unity was broken up into the four essences. That is an assumption. Therefore, the primordial unity was poured into the elements. And apparently they didn't have the periodic table back then, because they weren't talking about the individual elements, right? Anything confronting us is part of the divinity which was poured out, but the divinity is hidden in the thing. It first had to die that things might come into being. And what are these things? Mixtures of divine constituents effectuated by love and hatred. Empedocles says this distinctly. Now, I'm going to do this right here, right? It first had to die that things might come into being is not true. The divine didn't die. God is still very much alive. The Holy Spirit very much surrounds us completely. Now, I hold slightly different views than other people, right? My Trinity is the body, or the temple, the soul, the individualized piece of divinity, and the Holy Spirit, which is the everything. It is literally every single atom in existence at all points in time. The only thing different, right? I am differentiated in my temple than you are in yours. That is different. My soul is a differentiated piece of the eternal. That is different, but the eternal did not die for that to happen. That is not what happened. The eternal expressed life in a different way. That is what happened. I am a different expression of the life of the divine than you are, but we are both expressions of the divine. We are both expressions of the life of the divine. That is an important thing. You being here did not kill the divine, and there is no way that you being here will ever kill the divine. Okay? That is important. Empedocles says this distinctly. See, for a clear demonstration how the limbs of a man are constructed. All that the body possesses in beauty and pride of existence, all put together by love, are the elements there forming one. Afterwards, hatred and strife come and fatally tear them asunder. Once more they wander alone on the desolate confines of life. So it is with the bushes and trees and the water-inhabiting fishes. Wild animals roaming their mountains and ships swiftly borne by their sails. And again, what's the point of this? Like, yes, we are all constituted of the elements. Yes, we all assimilate the elements as we go along. Like, I'm assimilating this water, right? I take this hydrogen and oxygen mixture and I drink it and it assimilates into myself. It goes, the Holy Spirit takes it from my stomach and disperses hydrogen and oxygen to various places in my body. That happens. That doesn't mean this, right? Like, yes, it's all put together by love and all the elements are there forming one. Okay, yes, absolutely true. All that the body possesses in beauty and pride of existence. Yep. And afterwards, hatred and strife come and fatally tear them asunder. Yeah, they do. Or they don't. Both of those are true. If you live in a place where there is a lot of contention, there is entirely a possible that hatred and strife will come and tear you asunder. But if you live in a place of light and enlightenment, there's a chance that you won't. There are places out there that have never seen war. They're few and far between. Most of them are little islands, and they don't really let many people go there, but they're there. Decay is part of the human condition, but it is part of the mortal condition, right? The entirety of everything is decaying at a very slow rate. Some things decay faster than others, but yes, you will be torn apart. Right? Even in an allegorical way, you will face strife and hardship, and it will attempt to tear you asunder. Whether it does or not, that is up to you. That's got a lot to do with the mental alchemy. But eventually, regardless of who you are, you will die. You will decay. Your body will go back to the elements where it will be brought together once again by something else. Now, whether these particular elements get put back together into another human, I don't care. I could become part of a tree or a blade of grass. That's entirely possible. That's not my soul. That's the temple. The temple is temporal, right? The temple is meant for the time. And so we are here navigating through 5D space in this temple, but this temple is not the essence of who we are. It is the means by which we express the essence of who we are. So it is the same with bushes and trees and water inhabiting fishes. Everything is torn apart and everything is put together, but this has nothing to do with Osiris again, right? That's where this was supposed to be going. This was supposed to be an example of Empedocles telling us about the Osiris myth, and it is not at all. Empedocles therefore must come to the conclusion that the sage finds again in the divine primordial unity, hidden in the world by a spell, and entangled in the meshes of love and hatred. But if man finds the divine, he must himself be divine, for Empedocles takes the point of view that a being is only cognized by his equal. That is dumb. That is disqualifying as an intellectual. Right there. You think these dogs don't recognize me? Are they equal to me? In the grand scheme of things, yeah, we're all created by God, but we're on different levels of existence. I'm in the 5th dimension, they're in the 4th, right? They don't cognize the things that I do, but they recognize me. Do they not cognize me? Are they equal to me? Then this is completely baseless. Right? They're not equal to me. They're on a lower plane of existence. I am responsible for their care. They are my pets. Right? Some people consider them themselves the pets of their pets, but that is a problem up here, right? If a man finds the divine, he must himself be divine. You are a tiny expression of the divine. I will grant that much. I am a tiny expression of the divine. I will grant that much, but we are not the divine. The divine is so much bigger, so much larger than us, so much more than we are, that we might as well be the dogs. Right? We're not on the same level as the divine. We're not even close to understanding all the intricacies of life, much less being able to reproduce them without assistance. We have not the capacity to create life. We can undergo the chemical changes, right? We can take the sperm and the ovum and we can meld them together and let nature take its course. But we cannot create that spark of life outside of the sperm and the egg. We just can't do it. And there's never going to be a time that we can. That is an impossibility. You don't get to create life from nothing. At the very minimum, you are taking things that are already part of existence, right? You are not equal to God. But I recognize that God exists. I am definitely not equal to God. Definitely not equal to God. Definitely not equal to God. And yet I know that He's there. I know that He's there in a certainty that most people don't even get the joy of having. I have spent the time in prayer, fasting, and meditation. I have had the divine experience these people are talking about. I have done the thing. And I don't say that with pride, right? That is not me. That is something that God allowed me to do through my dedication. That is something that you are just as capable of doing. It is not because I am special. It is because I took the time to actually do it. I have had this experience. I have affected change in my own life. I have healed myself literally. And I would never, never call myself divine. I am a tiny expression of the divine. I am a tiny little sliver of the divine. I am part of the divine, but I am not the divine. That is another important distinction. This conviction of his is expressed in Goethe's lines. If the eye were not of the nature of the sun, how could we behold light? If divine force were not at work in us, how could we divine things delight us? That is, again, disqualifying for intellectualism. It is perfectly fine to think about these questions, but if you spend any amount of time in thought about this, then you will come to the same conclusion that I did. I assume, right? I assume that I am correct in this. I assume that because I have been able to do the things that other people talk about, that it's something that I know that they don't, right? If they're out there talking about, well, healing can happen, but nothing ever happens around them, they don't really believe it. I have healed myself. Right? It is through the power of the Holy Spirit. It's not like I physically went in there and changed things. I did it with the power of the mind. I did it by manipulating the electromagnetic forces of creation. I did it by acting through divine will. But it wasn't like I made the decision and the Holy Spirit made it happen. That's how the mechanics of that works. I made the decision and God let it happen because it was within the plan. It could have not been within the plan, and that would have been perfectly fine too, because I am not divine. If the eye were not of the nature of the sun, how could we behold light? Really? Like, that is really stretching simile, right? The eye is an orb, okay, that's kind of like the sun. The eye emits light, so yes, again, kind of like the sun. It receives light. I don't know how much like the sun that's going to be. But my eye doesn't catch on fire. It's not hot beyond all contemplation. It is not something that would destroy everything that it came in contact with. Right? Like, there is definitely differences. Was the eye created for the sun? Probably being able to see the photons reflecting off of various things is something that we evolved to be able to do. So yeah, okay, it's tied to the sun, but this is an assumption. This is assuming something that is not necessarily correct, right? It is not necessarily correct that the eye and the sun are the same. Like even in simile, that is not something that is automatic. You're not automatically going to make that assumption. And if divine force were not at work in us, how could divine things delight us? Well, you know what? Undivine things delight us too. There are a lot of things that people get a lot of pleasure from that are absolutely antithetical to the divine. At least in our understanding of it, right? If God is light, love, truth, and growth, then how do people delight in war? How do people delight in lies? How do people delight in debauchery? Is that not a divine force working in them? Is the divine force negative? Is it a negative divine force? The understanding being relayed here is not correct on a fundamental level. It is something that may take a little bit more discernment to understand. But these assumptions should not lead into verified fact, right? You shouldn't say, well, Goethe said if the eye were not of the nature of the sun, how could we behold light, and take that as truth. You should not do that. Back to the text. These thoughts about the world and man, which transcend sense experience, were found by the mystic in the myth of Osiris. Divine creative force has been poured out into the universe. It appears as the four elements. God, Osiris, is killed. Man is to raise him from the dead with his cognition, which is of a divine nature. He is to find him again as Horus, the son of God, the Logos, wisdom. In the opposition between strife, Typhon, and love, Isis, Empedocles expressed his fundamental conviction in Greek form by means of images which border on myth. Love is Aphrodite and strife is Nikos. They bind and unbind the elements. Okay, so Osiris the god is killed. Well, if he was killed, he was never a god. Straight off the top. Man is to raise him from the dead with his cognition. No, Isis was to do that. Right? Isn't that what happened in the legend? Isis went through love, found the body and put it back together and brought him back to life. Isn't that how the story went? Was it a man? Was a man involved? Okay, so you're saying that Isis was a man, and not necessarily like genitalia man, but human. Well, that separates her from the divine right there. There is a logical chain of fallacies that are being built upon, and it doesn't make any sense. Now, can it be allegorical? Absolutely. Most likely even, right? The taking the man and killing him and dismembering him and losing the pieces and all of that, that can absolutely be an allegory. We should not assume that we have the correct interpretation of an allegory in which we did not speak the language. We can study hieroglyphs. We can get a very good estimation of what they probably mean. But we do not know the subtleties of the text. That is like only ever reading French and trying to read English. It is going to fuck you up. You're going to make assumptions that are not true. The gendered language thing's not really a thing over here in the way that it is there. And so trying to read is going to throw you off. There are parts that you are missing. This can absolutely, and most likely is, an allegory about the soul's journey. The Egyptians almost certainly had a better understanding of that than we do. But there were several things attached to them that were not correct as well, right? We're not going to dive into the deep Egyptian magic stuff, but the blood stuff, really bad every single time, no matter who it is. And they did a lot of the blood stuff. The redemption through love of the man killed by jealousy, that's a real thing, right? That's an allegory. The jealousy of a brother for another brother, another good allegory. It absolutely works. But assuming that you understand the fullness of the allegory, right? I'm not even trying to do that. I'm merely trying to point out the inconsistencies and the parts that don't really fit, right? Nothing that we just read leads into this unless you are trying to read into this the things that were said, right? If you go back through this does not say anything about Osiris and Isis, right? There is nothing in there about that, but you are using that to build upon this myth. It is not necessarily relevant. And this basic story, right, of Osiris and Isis being Aphrodite and Nikos, that's possible too, right? This is an assumption and an assimilation of a story. If you don't believe that that happens, you need to reread the Old Testament, because the entirety of the first 5 books is that. Taking someone else's story and assimilating it. Hell, the whole book of Job came from somewhere else. It has nothing to do with the God of the Hebrews. If you read through Job, it is a different God that Job is dealing with. And so, yes, they do indeed assume myths from other people. The betrayal of the content of a myth in the manner followed here must not be confused with a merely symbolical or even allegorical interpretation of myths. This is not intended. The images forming the contents of a myth are not invented symbols of abstract truths, but actual soul experiences of the initiate. He experiences the images with his spiritual organs of perception, just as the normal man experiences the images of physical things with his eyes and ears. But as an image is nothing in itself if it is not aroused in the perception of it by an outer object, so the mythical image is nothing unless it is excited by real facts of the spiritual world. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say it here. I've said it plenty of times before. I have had a spiritual experience. I have had an angel come to me and tell me that I was going to spread the word of God. I had myself taken out of my body and had an entire experience outside of myself, and none of that was part of it. None of anything that we have read so far has been a part of any part of my spiritual journey, and I have achieved things. Right? It may not be things that I can readily show you. I can't flash wads of cash at you and talk about, oh, I'm some giant manifester. But I have manifested healing. I have done that. You don't have to believe that. There is proof, right? Keep in mind that just because you have a spiritual experience, it does not mean that it is necessarily tied to your understanding of the spiritual experience. That is true for me as well. I had a spiritual experience with Jesus way back 20 years ago. I had another completely separate spiritual experience without Jesus. That was much more recent and a much more real spiritual experience in my estimation. It literally changed me in a way that Jesus did not. Just because your spiritual experience comes with the understanding of what you already know doesn't mean that it is the truth. Now, I stand that I walk on the truth because I am separating as much as possible all of the extras, right? Jesus being necessary for you to be forgiven from sin is an extra. That is something that was added in later, halfway through history, right? Our recorded history, halfway through it. We said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and write this down. That doesn't mean it's true. It means you could have a spiritual experience inside of Jesus, but people do that with Buddha. People do that with Allah. People do that with Shiva. People have spiritual experiences outside of. Now, my experience has none of those names attached. What I went through was directly with the Creator, as far as I'm concerned, with no intermediary necessary, no physical incarnation here on this planet at all. That is a different understanding than most people. That makes me a little bit different, but it's not a difference to me the way that it is to you, right? If you are a follower of Jesus, for me to say you can be forgiven by God is blasphemy. That's a little bit wild, right? Just a little bit wild. If you think that's wild, let me know down below. I think it's a little bit wild, right? To think that God is limited by what this one group, a third of the people, believe. So you're telling me, like, even today, 2/3 of the world just dies and they go directly to hell regardless. That's what you're telling me. Because honestly, Christianity is not the predominant religion in the world. Islam is, right? As far as I know, Islam, last time I checked, Islam had more adherents professing than any other religion. And next up is Buddhism. And then you get Christianity. So you're telling me that most of the people in the world are going to go to hell. That's a little bit wild. You're telling me that they are all prohibited from being forgiven from God unless they believe the thing which you believe. I'm taking that part out. You don't need Jesus. You don't need Buddha. You don't need Allah or Muhammad, however you want to look at it. You don't need that. What you need is God by himself. You need to turn to God and he will correct you in the manner which you need to be corrected. I don't even tell you what sins are, right? Outside of murder. Murder is a sin, right? Outside of the big ones. I don't tell you that drinking is a sin. I don't tell you that smoking is a sin. I don't tell you that cussing is a sin. I don't tell you that because I don't know. I know the things that I have been prohibited from doing. I know that God took smoking away from me. I know that he took drinking away from me. I know that he took lasciviousness, right? Running around after every split tail I possibly could. He took those things from me. Those he told me were sins. But that doesn't mean that they are for you. Your journey and my journey are not the same one. We are here for different experiences. And a major component in our primary religions these days is the inability to understand that. That my understanding and your understanding don't have to be the same understanding. If you are genuinely searching for God, he will find you where you are, regardless of what your control system is. And he will affect the change in your life in the same manner that he did in mine if you merely do the things that I did. Pray, fast, and meditate. That is the extent of it. I didn't have to call on any specific name. I didn't have to perform any rituals. I didn't do any of those things. I sought God with all of my heart and I found. I assume that you can do the same thing. Only in regard to the physical world, man is at first outside the exciting causes, whereas he can only experience the images of myths when he is within the corresponding spiritual occurrences. In order, however, to be within them, he must have gone through initiation. When the spiritual occurrences within which he is perceiving are, as it were, illustrated by the myth images. Anyone who cannot take the mythical element, such as illustration of real spiritual occurrences, has not yet attained an understanding of it. And that's entirely possible. Maybe I just don't have the understanding. Or maybe you have an understanding that doesn't necessarily fit. Again, I have done things, and so that gives me a little bit more hubris as I'm doing this, and I'm trying not to be prideful. But there is a certain amount of accomplishment in what I have done. Now, was it me accomplishing all of the things? No, it was the Holy Spirit. But I definitely played my part. For the spiritual events themselves are supersensible, and images which are reminiscent of the physical world are not themselves of a spiritual nature, but only an illustration of spiritual things. One who lives merely in the images lives in a dream. Only one who has got to the point of feeling the spiritual element in the image as he feels in the sense world, a rose, through the image of a rose, really lives in spiritual perceptions. This is the reason why the images of myths cannot have only one meaning, on account of their illustrative character. The same myths may express several spiritual facts. It is not therefore a contradiction when interpreters of myths sometimes connect a myth with one spiritual fact and sometimes with another. I would bring some points of contention to that, but we're already getting long and I've already expressed them. So, from this standpoint, we are able to find a thread to conduct us through the labyrinth of Greek myths. Let us consider the legend of Heracles. The 12 labors imposed upon Heracles appear in a higher light when we remember that before the last and most difficult one, he is initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. He is commissioned by King Eurystheus of Mycenae to bring the hellhound Cerberus from the infernal regions and take it back there again. In order to undertake the descent into hell, Heracles had to be initiated. The mysteries conducted man through the death of perishable things, therefore into the netherworld, and by an initiation they rescued his eternal part from perishing. As a mystic, he could vanquish death. Heracles, having become a mystic, overcomes the dangers of the netherworld. This justifies us in interpreting his other ordeals as stages in the inner development of the soul. He overcomes the Nemean lion and brings him to Mycenae. This means that he becomes a master of purely physical force in man. He tames it. Afterwards, he slays the 9-headed Hydra. He overcomes it with firebrands and dips his arrows in its gall so that they become deadly. This means that he overcomes lower knowledge, that which comes through the senses. He does this through the fire of the spirit and from what he has gained through the lower knowledge. He draws the power to look at lower things in the light which belongs to spiritual sight. Heracles captures the hind of Artemis, goddess of hunting. Everything which free nature offers to human soul, Heracles conquers and subdues. The other labors may be interpreted in the same way. We cannot here trace out every detail and only wish to describe how the general sense of the myth points to inner development. A similar interpretation is possible for the expedition of the Argonauts. Phrixus and his sister Hel, children of the Boeotian king, suffered many things from their stepmother. The gods sent them a ram with a golden fleece, which flew away with them. When they came to the straits between Europe and Asia, Helle was drowned. Hence the strait is called Hellespont. Phrixus came to the king of Colchis, on the east shore of the Black Sea. He sacrificed the ram to the gods and gave its fleece to King Aeetes. The king had it hung up in a grove and guarded by a terrible dragon. The Greek hero Jason undertook to fetch the fleece from Colchis, in company with other heroes, Heracles, Theseus, and Orpheus. Heavy tasks were laid upon Jason by Aes for obtaining the treasure, but Medea, the king's daughter, who was versed in magic, aided him. He subdued 2 fire-breathing bulls. He plowed a field and sowed it in dragons' teeth, from which armed men grew up out of the earth. By Medea's advice, he threw a stone into their midst, whereupon they killed each other. Jason lulls the dragon to sleep with the charm of Medea's and is then able to win the fleece. He returns with it to Greece, Medea accompanying him as his wife. The king pursues the fugitives. In order to detain him, Medea slays her little brother, Abystris, and scatters his limbs in the sea. Aeetes says to collect them, and the pair are able to reach Jason's home with the fleece. Each of these facts require a deep elucidation. The fleece is something belonging to man, and infinitely precious to him. It is something from which he was separated in times of yore, and for recovery of which he has to overcome terrible forces. It is thus with the eternal in the human soul. It belongs to man, but man is separated from it by his lower nature. Only by overcoming the latter and lulling it to sleep can he recover the eternal. This becomes possible when his own consciousness, Medea, comes to his aid with its magical power. Medea is to Jason what Diotima was to Socrates, a teacher of love. Man's own wisdom has the magic power necessary for attaining the divine after having overcome the transitory. From the lower nature there can only arise a lower human principle. The armed men who are overcome by spiritual force, the counsel of Medea. Even when man has found the eternal, the fleece, he is not yet safe. He has to sacrifice part of his consciousness, Abystris, which is exacted from the physical world, which we can not only apprehend as multiple dismembered world. We might go still deeper into the description of the spiritual events lying behind the images, but it is only intended here to indicate the principle of the formation of myths. And again, you can read a variety of things into myths. That does not necessarily mean that they were the original intentions thereof. Of special interest, when interpreted in this way, is the legend of Prometheus. He and his brother Epimetheus were sons of the Titan Iapetus. The Titans are the offspring of the oldest generation of gods, Uranus, heaven, and Gaia, earth. Kronos, the youngest of the Titans, dethroned his father and seized upon the government of the world. In return, he was overpowered, with the other Titans, by his son, Zeus, who became the chief of the gods. In the struggle with the Titans, Prometheus was on the side of Zeus. By his advice, Zeus banished the Titans to the netherworld. But in Prometheus, there still lived the Titan spirit. He was only half a friend to Zeus. When the latter wished to exterminate men on account of their arrogance, Prometheus espoused their cause, taught them numbers, writing, and everything else that leads to culture, especially the use of fire. It is important to note here that Zeus represents Enlil and Prometheus represents Enki, which is an older story, in case you didn't know. This aroused the wrath of Zeus against Prometheus. Hephaestus, the son of Zeus, was commissioned to take a female form of great beauty, whom the gods adorned with every possible gift. She was called Pandora, the all-gifted one. Hermes, messenger of the gods, brought her to Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus. She brought him a casket as a present from the gods. Epimetheus accepted the present, although Prometheus had warned him against receiving any gift from the gods. And when the casket was opened, every possible human evil flew out of it. Hope alone remained, and this because Pandora quickly closed the box. Hope has therefore been left to man as a doubtful gift of the gods. By order of Zeus, Prometheus was chained to a rock on Caucasus on account of his relation to man. An eagle perpetually gnaws his liver, which is as often renewed. He has to pass his life in agonizing loneliness till one of the gods voluntarily sacrifices himself, in example, devotes himself to death. The tormented Prometheus bears this suffering steadfastly. It had been told to him that Zeus would be dethroned by the son of a mortal unless Zeus consented to wed this mortal woman. It was important for Zeus to know this secret. He sent the messenger Hermes to Prometheus in order to learn something about it. And Prometheus refused to say anything. The legend of Heracles is connected with that of Prometheus. In the course of his wanderings, Heracles came to the Caucasus. He slays the eagle which was devouring the liver of Prometheus. The centaur Chiron, who cannot die, although suffering from an incurable wound, sacrifices himself for Prometheus, who is thereupon reconciled with the gods. The Titans are the force of will, proceeding as nature, Kronos, from the original universal spirit, Uranus. Here we have to think not merely of will forces in an abstract form, but of actual will beings. Prometheus is one of them, and this describes his nature, but he is not altogether a Titan. In a certain sense, he is on the side of Zeus, the spirit, who enters upon the rulership of the world after the unbridled force of nature, Kronos, has been subdued. Prometheus is, thus, the representative of those worlds which have given man the progressive element, half nature force, half spiritual force, man's will. The will points on the one side towards good and on the other towards evil. Its fate is decided according as it leans to the spiritual or the perishable. This fate is that of man himself. He is chained to the perishable. The eagle gnaws at him. He has to suffer. He can only reach the highest by seeking his destiny in solitude. He has a secret, which is that the divine, Zeus, must marry a mortal, human consciousness bound up in the physical body, in order to beget a son, human wisdom, the Logos, which will deliver the deity. By this means, consciousness becomes immortal. He must not betray the secret till a mystic, Heracles, comes to him and annihilates the power which was perpetually threatening him with death. A being, half animal, half human, a centaur, is obliged to sacrifice itself to redeem man. The centaur is man himself, half animal, half spiritual. He must die in order that the purely spiritual man may be delivered. That which is disdained by Prometheus, human will, is accepted by Epimetheus, reason or prudence. But the gifts offered to Epimetheus are only troubles and sorrows, for reason clings to the transitory and perishable, and only one thing is left, the hope that even out of the perishable the eternal may someday be born. There's a problem with the story of Pandora in the box, right? She has all of the evils of the world contained in this box, then why is hope in there? Why is hope the only thing contained in the box, and why is hope not released upon humanity like the rest of them are? Right? If strife and trouble are released, and lies and deceit are released, and those things afflict men, then how is hope remaining in the box going to afflict men with hope? That doesn't make sense, right? That's a little bit inconsistent, right? You had to let everything else out of the box in order for it to affect men, but you hold on to hope and it'll be there. Was love not in the box? The thread running through the legends of the Argonauts, Heracles and Prometheus, is continued in Homer's Odyssey. Here, we find ourselves compelled to use our own method of interpretation. You are already doing that. But on closer consideration of everything which has to be taken into account, even the sturdiest doubter must lose all scruples about such an interpretation. In the first place, it is a startling fact that it is also related of Odysseus that he descended into the netherworld. I'm sure it's completely unrelated. Whatever we may think about the author of the Odyssey in other respects, it is impossible to imagine his representing a mortal descending to the infernal regions without his bringing him into connection with what his journey into the netherworld meant to the Greeks. It meant the conquest of the perishable and the awakening of the eternal in the soul. That is not what it meant. It must therefore be conceded that Odysseus accomplishes this, and thereby his experiences, and those of Heracles, acquire a deeper significance. They become a delineation of the non-sensuous, of the soul's progress of development. Hence, the narrative in the Odyssey is different from what is demanded by a history of outer events. The hero makes voyages in enchanted ships. Actual geographical distances are dealt with in the most arbitrary fashion. It is not in the least a question of what is physically real. This becomes comprehensible if the physically real events are only related for the sake of illustrating the development of a soul. Moreover, the poet himself at the opening of the book says that it deals with the search for the soul. I'm going to have to read the Odyssey, I guess. O Muse, sing to me of the man full of resource, who wandered very much after he had destroyed the sacred city of Troy, and saw the cities of many men and learned their manners. Many griefs also in his mind did he suffer on the sea, although seeking to preserve his own soul and the return of his companions. Well, that wasn't a search for the soul, right? He's seeking to preserve his soul, so he's knowledgeable about it already. Yes, I know, it is a small distinction, but it is a distinction, right? Sing to me of a man full of resource who wandered very much after he destroyed the sacred city of Troy, which is why he is seeking to preserve his own soul. He destroyed many people, right? It can be a spiritual journey, it even likely is, but we have before us a man seeking for the soul, for the divine, and his wanderings during this search are narrated. He comes to the land of the Cyclops. These are uncouth giants with only one eye, and that in the center of the forehead. The most terrible, Polyphemus, devours several of Odysseus's companions. Odysseus himself escapes by blinding the Cyclops. Here we have to do with the first stage of life's pilgrimage. Physical force, or the lower nature, has to be overcome. It devours anyone who does not take away its power, who does not blind it. Odysseus next comes to the island of the enchantress Circe. She changes some of his companions into grunting pigs. She is also subdued by Odysseus. Circe is the lower mind force, which cleaves to the transitory. If misused, it may thrust men down even deeper into bestiality. Odysseus has to overcome it. Then he is able to descend into the netherworld. He becomes a mystic. Now he is exposed to the dangers which beset the mystic on his progress from the lower to the higher degrees of initiation. He comes to the sirens, who lure the passerby to death by sweet, magic sounds. These are the forms of the lower imagination, which are at first pursued by one who has freed himself from the power of the senses. He has got so far that his spirit acts freely, but it is not initiated. He pursues illusions, from the power of which he must break loose. Odysseus has to accomplish the awful passage between Scylla and Charybdis. The mystic, at the beginning of the path, wavers between spirit and sensuousness. He cannot yet grasp the full value of spirit, yet sensuousness has already lost its former attraction. All Odysseus's companions perish in a shipwreck. He alone escapes and comes to the nymph Calypso, who receives him kindly and takes care of him for 7 years. At length, by the order of Zeus, she dismisses him to his home. The mystic has arrived at a stage at which all his fellow aspirants fail. He, alone, Odysseus, is worthy. He enjoys for a time, which is defined by the mystically symbolic number 7, the rest of the gradual initiation. And 8 would be the beginning of the next part of that. When Odysseus arrives at his home, he comes to the Isle of the Phases, where he meets with a hospitable reception. The king's daughter gives him sympathy, and the king, Alcinous, entertains and honors him. Once more does Odysseus approach the world and its joys, and the spirit which is attached to the world, Nausicaa, awakens within him. But he finds the way home to the divine. At first, nothing good awaits him at home. His wife Penelope is surrounded by numerous suitors. Each one she promises to marry when she finishes weaving a certain piece of work. She avoids keeping her promise by undoing every night what she has woven by day. Odysseus is obliged to vanquish the suitors before he can be reunited to his wife in peace. The goddess Athene changes him into a beggar so that he may not be recognized at his entrance, and thus he overcomes the suitors. Odysseus is seeking his own deeper consciousness, the divine powers of the soul. He wishes to be united with them. Before the mystic can find them, he must overcome everything which sues for the favor of that consciousness. The band of suitors spring from the world of lower reality, from perishable nature. The logic directed against them is a spinning, which is always undone again after it has been spun. Wisdom, the goddess Athene, is a sure guide to the deepest powers of the soul. It changes man into a beggar. An example, it divests him of everything of a transitory nature. The Eleusinian festivals, which were celebrated in Greece in honor of Demeter and Dionysus, were steeped in the wisdom of the mysteries. A sacred road led from Athens to Eleusis. It was bordered with mysterious signs intended to bring the soul into an exalted mood. If Eleusis were mysterious temples served by families of priests, the dignity and the wisdom which was bound up with it were inherited in these families from generation to generation. Instructive information about the organization of these sanctuaries will be found in Karl Bottcher's Ergänzungen zu den letzten Untersuchungen auf der Akropolis in Athens. Philologius, Supplement, Volume 3, Part 3. The wisdom which qualified for the priesthood was the wisdom of the Greek mysteries. The festivals, which were celebrated twice a year, represented the great world drama of the destiny of the divine in the world and of that of the human soul. The lesser mysteries took place in February, the greater in September. Initiations were connected with the festivals. The symbolical presentation of the cosmic and the human drama formed the final act of the initiations of the mystics, which took place here. The Eleusinian temples had been erected in honor of the goddess Demeter. She was a daughter of Cronos. She had given to Zeus a daughter, Persephone, before his marriage with Hera. Persephone, while playing, was carried away by Hades, Pluto, the god of the infernal regions. Demeter wandered far and wide over the earth, seeking her with lamentations. Sitting on a stone in Eleusis, she was found by the daughters of Celesus, ruler of the place. In the form of an old woman, she entered the service of his family as nurse to the queen's son. She wished to endow the boy with immortality, and for this purpose hid him in fire every night. When his mother discovered this, she wept and lamented. After that, the bestowal of immortality was impossible. Demeter left the house. Celesus then built a temple. The gift of Demeter for Persephone was limitless. She spread sterility over the earth. The gods had to appease her to prevent a great catastrophe. Then Zeus induced Hades, Pluto, to release Persephone into the upper world. But before letting her go, he gave her a pomegranate to eat. This obliged her to return periodically to the netherworld forevermore. Henceforth, she spent a third of the year there, and 2/3 in the world above. Demeter was appeased and returned to Olympus, but at Eleusis, the place of her suffering, she founded the cult which should keep her fate in remembrance. It is not difficult to discover the meaning of the myth of Demeter and Persephone. It is the soul which lives alternately above and below. The immortality of the soul and its perpetually recurring transformation by birth and death are thus symbolized. The soul originates from the immortal, Demeter, but it is led astray by the transitory, and even prevailed upon to share its destiny. It has partaken of the fruits in the netherworld. The human soul is satisfied with the transitory, therefore it cannot permanently live in the heights of the divine. It has always to return to the realm of the perishable. Demeter is the representative of the essence from which human consciousness arose, but we must think of it as the consciousness which was able to come into being through the spiritual forces of the earth. Thus, Demeter is the primordial essence of the earth, the endowment of the earth with the seed forces of the produce of the fields through her, points to a still deeper side of her being. This being wishes to give man immortality. She hides her nursling in fire by night, but man cannot bear the pure force of the fire, the spirit. Demeter is obliged to abandon the idea. She is only able to found a temple service, through which man is able to participate in the divine as far as this is possible. The Eleusinian festivals were an eloquent confession of the belief of the immortality of the human soul. This confession found symbolic expression in the Persephone myth. Together with Demeter and Persephone, Dionysus was commemorated in Eleusis. As Demeter was honored in the divine creatress of the eternal in man, so in Dionysus was honored the ever-changing divine in the world. The divine poured into the world and torn to pieces in order to be spiritually reborn, had to be honored together with Demeter. A brilliant description of the spirit of the Eleusinian mysteries is found in Edward Charay's book, Sanctuaries d'Orient, Paris, 1898. And that is going to bring us to the end of part 5. Now, I didn't interrupt as we continued going through the myths because there are other explanations for the myths, and who knows what the correct one is. My estimation of most of the myths are that they are representing things that happened in the sky. That once upon a time, our world did not look like it does now. That the North and the South Pole were not in their current locations, right? The Earth moves 90 degrees on a cyclical pattern at a 12,000-year interval. I believe that the myths of the gods come from the time when we were last in the other orientation, which means 90 degrees from where we are now. That there was an external force that entered into the solar system and created the changes that we are now currently under. The moving of the 90 degrees, the capture of the moon. That is most likely the Persephone myth, right? The time when the moon was captured. The way that myths assimilate and change over time is something that we are aware of, but not in control of. The retelling of the story changes it gradually over time, generally. So the story that we hear is most likely not the original story, but has been greatly personified over the course of time to be something by which we identify in a personal manner. I do believe that the order of the sky has a lot to do with Uranus and Kronos and the things of that nature. And then most of the other stories are either entertainment primarily or a different way of expressing some of the natural things that happen. It is entirely possible that they were all created to be a revelation of the spiritual. But many of the points are not necessary to the spiritual journey, including all of the points made in this particular study today. The things that he is attributing to the necessity of the spiritual journey are not part of it. Overcoming the senses, yes, kind of, but you are sensate even when you are enlightened. You still chop wood, you still carry water, regardless. You are meant to be here and not in the divine. Otherwise, you would have remained in the divine. A lot of it has to do with my personal beliefs, and so I don't state them as facts, right? I state where I stand, but take it with a grain of salt. It is entirely possible that he is correct and I am wrong. I don't believe so, but it is entirely possible. So take these things with a grain of salt. Do your own estimations. Do your own study. Go back to the original source material and study it. We are delving deeper into the myths, right? What we're doing with the Tuatha De Danann and the Ancient Lore playlist is part of that. We will be going through Odysseus at some point. We will be going through the Iliad at some point. We will be going through various other myths and legends throughout time. Most of what I am doing when I am doing that is reading it into the record to get a better understanding. Like what I'm doing with the Tuatha De Danann and the various Irish myths is more about just reading them so I can get an understanding. I'm not trying to explain it. This is somebody trying to explain something that he probably doesn't fully understand, but it fits really well and it makes a good book and it'll sell to people. I'm not here to sell you something. I'm not. The super thanks that I get, and I have gotten several of them, I appreciate that. It is not why I am doing it. It is a reward for the thing that I am doing. I could chase off down rabbit holes that would lead to greater financial gain. That is something that is available to me, and I am intentionally choosing otherwise. I would much rather go through these and discuss whether or not I believe it is true. Some people have found some help in that. This particular study is a little bit less certain than some of the other ones that I do, because a lot of this is just assumptions. A lot of this is assuming that because you know this thing, then this other thing had to have been created for it, right? I know this spiritual truth, and so I'm going to insert myself into this myth. I'm not here for that. If I see something that absolutely speaks to me, I will relay it in the sense that this was part of my journey. We did that in Dante's Inferno when we got to purgatory, right? The entirety of hell was kind of what? And the entirety of heaven was kind of what? But the purgatory was kind of a spiritual journey between the two. That I could relate to and that I could talk about. But I talked about it in the language of, I believe that this is. Not in that it is a certainty. Here is what a certainty is. God is. God is the divine. He is all things at all times. He is not incorporated within himself other than the individualized piece that each and every one of us is. There has been no special person. There have been people who have enacted special practices. Prayer, fasting, and meditation are absolutely intrinsic to you achieving spiritual mastery. Swearing off the five senses is not. Understanding that there are elements is definitely a part of it, but they don't play a salvific part of it. Overcoming your sin nature, yes, that is absolutely part of it, right? To understand this is wrong, that is given to you in your soul. You get that, you understand it, and you put it into practice. That is part of the spiritual journey, yes. But most of what has been talked about in here today has not been a necessity. Prayer, fasting, and meditation, you absolutely have to do. If you want to be able to be spiritually enlightened, you have to endeavor in the manner in which spiritual enlightenment is found. Coming to the understanding of greater mysteries is even part of that. Looking into these myths and trying to understand, commendable. Absolutely 100%. Trying to portray that as fact, less so. And that's where I'm going to wrap this up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I am here to talk about these things. Some things I do have some authority in. I have had a spiritual experience. I have effected healing in my life. I have done things external. I know that these things are true, and so I stand on those things. The things that are less clear, I try not to be so firm about. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Let me know if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me along the lines of what we are doing here, leave that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks to the crew. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.